So Teacher is a professional network for educators. At Teacher, educators can connect with fellow educators, exchange ideas and resources, attend professional development sessions like these, and you can also find several thousands of jobs and other opportunities in the K-12 and above teaching segment. So you can check out all the information on teacher.in. Moving ahead, today we have with us one of India's top management faculties, Dr. Ramya Ranganathan. She's also a poet and an entrepreneur. We're extremely fortunate as Dr. Ramya would be sharing her thoughts on the topic, how can educators leverage the happiness advantage? To give you a brief intro of Dr. Ramya Ranganathan, she has a BTech in electronics from IIT Madras, a PGDM from IIM Ahmedabad, and a PhD in organizational behavior from London Business School. She worked as a faculty in organizational behavior in IIM Bangalore from 2010 to 2019, and she has been awarded by the Ministry of Human Resources and Development, Government of India, for being one of the top 15 innovators in the higher education segment in India. She specializes in helping people craft their lives in a way such that the achievement and happiness go hand in hand. She is currently an adjunct faculty at IIM Bangalore, and she regularly conducts leadership training programs for organizations. We are extremely fortunate to have Professor Ramya Ranganathan with us, and thank you so much, Dr. Ramya, for joining us. And we're really excited about today's session. I'm sure there are hundreds of teachers who have joined us from 4 different countries, and I'm sure that today's session would be very enlightening. I'm really excited about this. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Varun. And good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, even before I start, I must say I'm truly honored to be speaking to teachers and educators because I remember a long time ago hearing about, and I think all professions are useful, but one of the things that, and I don't remember where I read it, where I heard it, but I came across this somewhere that the 3 most meaningful professions really are doctors, teachers, and parents. And with apologies to all other professions, I do think it sort of rings true because I think it is a very noble profession, and especially those of you, whether you're working with children, and I know most of you are teaching children, and those of you who are teaching the more grown-up children as well. You're playing a very, very key role in society. You're playing a very, very key role in shaping and influencing the minds of our future. And so I'm truly honored to have this little window of opportunity to interact with you and perhaps be a contribution to you and the wonderful and important work that you are doing. So let me get started with sorry, just one second. I'm just trying to figure one thing out in my screen. Yeah, okay. So one of the things that I want to start with looking at this from the perspective of a student. So I'm going to put myself in the role of a student, and I want all of you also to put yourself in the shoes of the students that you teach. So if you're teaching kindergarten students, put yourself in their shoes. If you're teaching 7th standard students, put yourself in their shoes. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to actually think of my childhood and think of a time when I was a student. And a couple of things, I've loved studying, by the way, as a student. I was a nerd. I was also very desperate to do well. So I was someone who studied very hard. I was interested in studies, actually. And when I think back about what I decided as a kid were my favorite subjects, they were not driven so much by intrinsic interest or anything like that. At a very young age, it just depended on who the teacher was, whether I liked the teacher. And whether I liked the teacher or not actually depended not so much on what the teacher was teaching me, but how the teacher made me feel. And of course, this is very true in the early ages, the primary, high school, even in high school. In fact, I saw this and I realized this in a very funny way that I had this amazing chemistry teacher. Her name was Teacher Natarajan, and she was so nice. I was like completely in love with her. Okay, I was a big fan of her. So I decided chemistry was my favorite subject. I was like, I love chemistry, and I used to, burn the midnight oil for chemistry. And I used to really be interested in class. And And I was also scoring and doing very well in chemistry. So it was a very nice, positive spiral. So I'm happy and I'm doing well. The results are good, and therefore I'm happy and I'm doing more well. I'm studying happily, right? And then therefore the results are also good. And then post 10th standard, I shifted schools, and that's it. So this teacher was not there anymore as a chemistry teacher in my life. And beyond that, my interest in chemistry went down, 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 down. Okay, so, and I realized so much. That's when I started realizing that the teacher and the subject was so closely associated, even the experience of learning. So, of course, now fast forward many years, I'm also a teacher and I teach management students at IIM Bangalore. I also do a lot of executive programs, which means I teach adults. A lot of time, the adults that I teach are senior to me, they're older than me. But as a teacher, as an educator, I feel some key principles remain the same. And some of this I have learned in my own experience in the classroom. And some of this, I have been fortunate also to be in the field of psychology, and in the field I've been interested in neuroscience and really looking at the brain, at how the brain absorbs information, how the brain learns, how the brain changes its modes. And I study emotions also. I've researched emotions and how emotions change the mode and the information processing mode and the memory and so many other things in our brain, right? So some of what I'm going to share is going to come from my own experience as a teacher and educator. Some of it is also coming from just the science of the brain and how it functions. And put together in a nutshell, what I would literally like to, give as a key message is, let's not ignore the role that emotions play in the classroom, in the learning journey, in the journey of the student, studying something, even when the student is not in front of you. So I'll go back to my chemistry example. For example, I was so much in love with the teacher, and, just being in her presence, listening to her, being encouraged by her used to make me feel so happy that even when I'm at home, it became my favorite subject, right? So let's say my parents scolded me, or I had a bad day, or I went to play and there was, a fight with the other kids in the playground and I came back sad. I used to pick up my chemistry book as a pick-me-up. It's like how you pick up something to make me feel nice. And that was the relationship, right? So that is the emotional aspect. So the way that you might be priming your students to feel as teachers, you should know that can extend even beyond the classroom. So it's not if you have 60 minutes in the presence of the student, and of course we'll talk about how you can leverage the happiness advantage in the classroom itself. But I just want you to know that through the relationship that you have with the students, the way you inspire them, or the way they connect with you, or the way they make you feel, the way you are empathetic and you listen to them and have conversations even outside the class to the extent possible. And of course, I know this depends on the class size and your bandwidth and all of that. But all of this is going to impact the students, as human beings and people. And we all know that. But what I'm saying is it's also going to impact their own learning journey. And through that, their performance and actually how well they do even in the exams and the tangible measures that we have about learning, related to learning and knowledge. So let me now get into a little bit into the science of the brain. And Varun, I'm about questions. I know we decided I'll go 30 minutes and then we'll take Q&A. But in between, if there's a relevant question or a clarification question, feel free to just let me know that as well. I can't see the chat, but I'm assuming you can do that, right?
Absolutely, Professor. I'll do that.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Thank you. So, so I'm going to give you a few keys, so not to overload you with too much about the brain, but a few key things about the brain. So if you look at the structure of our brain, literally, not all parts of the brain are equal. Like we have different parts. So there's something at the base of the spine that we call the primitive brain. And this is the part of the brain that comes into control when we are stressed, when we are afraid, when we are angry, anxious. So this is the part of the brain that's in control in the driving seat. It's when, during the fight or flight response, which is the stress response. So if you're the sort of teacher who if your students are feeling afraid in your presence because you're scolding them or because you're going to punish them, and I'm not saying don't do that, but you should know that when you're putting students into a fear-based mode, it's their primitive brains that are coming into control. Now, when the primitive brain is actually designed for the fight or flight response, it's also called the reptilian brain in some ways. So it is not a very intelligent brain. It does not process thoughts very clearly. It's a brain that gets into defense mode, right? It's just into defend. I just want to defend myself. I want to run away. I want to hide. It's not very clever. The decision-making capabilities of this part of the brain are similar to the decision-making capabilities of reptiles, actually. That's why it's called the reptilian brain, which means it's a yes, no, very judgmental, binary kind of decision-making. Not the most conducive to learning and understanding what it is that you want to explain. So the first thing that all of us as teachers and educators must really be wary about is, yes, of course, there might be times, and I don't know, I do not really believe in using fear as a tactic to drive anything. But in case you have a need to do that in the classroom, because at least when I was at school, we did have teachers who did that. Please understand and know that there's a huge price that you're paying just in terms of A, the relationship with the student, and B, how much the student can even understand, because you are interacting with the reptilian or primitive part of the brain, and the student is going to have the defenses out. There's going to be a wall between you and the student, and cutting off possibility of anything else that can happen. So we don't want to, so we really want to sort of, avoid the zone of fear, anxiety as much as possible. The second thing is, and then the other thing is, we have negative emotions, we have neutral emotions, and then we have positive emotions, right? Where we are happy, we're excited, we're enthusiastic. We might love our teachers, like I loved my chemistry teachers, right? The caring, so there's positive. So I want to also compare between neutral and positive, because at least one of the things that, and as Varun explained, after my 12th standard, I went to IIT Madras, the perfect place for nerds. I was studying electrical and electronics engineering. Now these subjects, electrical and electronic engineering, again, it's a dry subject, right? It's as in, it's not humanities, it's not art. So it's really all about the intellect. You're understanding circuits, you're understanding machines. So it's mechanical. And of course, now, one would think that why, what's the role of emotions? Like, what is the relevance of emotions there at all? But here's what I want to tell you. So even there, if you want your brain to be really smart, our brain is actually smarter when we are feeling happier, not when we are neutral. So let me tell you about an experiment. This is from the field of positive psychology. So, and this was, okay, I'll tell you about two experiments actually. One that was done on children and one that was done on doctors. So you sort of get the entire spectrum, right? So in terms of children, the experiment that was done, and this was done on, preschool children, very young children, aged 4 to 5, they were given some blocks and puzzles and stuff to do, and they were divided into 3 groups. So one group is primed to, actually feel bad, which is they're being asked to think of the last time when something made them sad or feel bad. One group is primed to be neutral. They just, asked to just recollect something neutral. And the second group is primed to feel happy. And how do you do that with children? Just by giving them candy or chocolate. And in some experiments, they're just asked to think of their happiest memory and anything in the past that made them happy. And just thinking of that makes them happy. And then they're given this activity to do. And what the results, and then you compare these 3 groups, and what you find is that people who are primed to be happy, and here in this case the children, they do, of course the neutral does better than the negative, but they do better than the neutral also in 2 ways, right? They do better in terms of performance, in terms of how quickly they can actually solve the puzzles and get closer to the right answers. So just in terms of pure IQ, how well their brain is working. The second important thing, which I think we often, we relate IQ a lot with great performance, but there's another thing that's important in studies and learnings, which is persistence, right? That you don't give up. Because a lot of times, like as students, I mean, we have to persist. We have to continue. We have to put in the time and effort. So this group that was primed to be happy, even as kids, they persisted longer on those puzzles. Even when the puzzles were difficult and they couldn't find the solutions, they persisted longer before giving up. That's interesting, right? So why would you want to give up that advantage at any level of our education? Because isn't it important? Don't we want, whether we are studying electrical energy or chemistry or biology or maths or whatever, at whichever age, we want our best part of the brain to be active and doing it. And the second thing is that studies takes time and effort, right? So, and we all know that, so we want to persist, so we want to not give up easily, and positive emotions actually give us that extra strength and energy to persist through that, even when there are small downsets and things like that. Okay, little failures, or we're not getting the answer, but we'll still keep trying. Now, the second group that I wanted to tell you about, and if you think, oh, this only happens to children, then you know these experiments have been done in different places, even with managers and executives. But I'll tell you about doctors, because for doctors, it's very important that they make the right diagnosis, right? And you will think that if you're looking at the symptoms of a patient and you have to try and make the diagnosis, this is a very nerdy, very analytical task. This is not an emotional, right? Very few doctors get emotions involved when they're trying to diagnose what disease a patient has. But when doctors were divided into three groups, and again, they were primed into different emotional states, the group that was primed to be happy outdid the other two groups by an average of 30%. So they'd made a 30% more correct diagnosis, given the same level of medical knowledge across the groups, right? Now, that is, again, a huge advantage. And that is just pointing to what? The analytical ability of the brain, how cleverly your brain is being able to remember everything that you've learned as a doctor about which symptom is related to which, and actually do that decision making, do that analysis. So, yeah, so basically, the first point I want to say is that our brain is wired to think better and to persist longer when we are happy. So I would say, as a teacher, the gift of learning is a wonderful gift that you're anyway giving your students. Along with that, if you can give them if you can also pay attention to their emotional state and do whatever it takes, and we can discuss more about that. How do you actually prime people to be happy? You can't it's not 100% that there's a magic way of making others happy, but what are the steps that you can take to increase the probability that your students are going to feel better, so that they can actually learn and study better? So that's the first thing that I want to say. The second part of something about the brain that I want to tell you is there is actually a research called, it's a theory called the broaden and build theory. Now, to understand the significance and relevance of the broaden and build theory, I want to talk to you about another little thing, a technical term, something called bounded awareness. So what is bounded awareness? Bounded awareness is really basically the term for the simple fact that there might be a lot of data and stuff outside, but our brain never takes in all the information that there is, right? Right now I'm sitting in a room, but my brain is not taking in everything that there is. It will always look at something and it will leave out something, because that's the limited capacity of the brain. So think of a metaphorical lens that there's there in the brain and how much information it can take in. Now, this lens, by the way, you can manipulate and change it in many ways. This lens can go in to see what are the problems, the negatives, the positives, whether you want to validate. So different manipulations that you can have with the lens. But the basic aperture, or the capacity of the lens itself, can be modified. And this gets modified based on the emotion that is being experienced by the person. So when we are under negative emotions, we have a very more narrow lens, and that's the evolutionary response. So for example, if you think you're in a stress state and you're in a forest, you're running away, right? You don't want to be looking at all kinds of other possibilities. You just want to get rid of that one problem. So in a way, it's a very narrow focus, but it's also a very narrow lens. And then there's a neutral, you're neutral. And then when you're feeling happy, the lens actually broadens out. So your brain is like, okay, I'm in a happy state, I'm in a relaxed state. There's no danger, there's no threat. And that is the time your brain actually is paying attention to peripheral signals, more information, more data points. And that is where you can actually start making all these connections. So there is a lot of talk nowadays about making education and learning holistic, right? So you don't want to just do the textbook. Okay, this just happened. I'm just by hearting this and getting this out. If you're doing that, if you're looking at a very mechanical, I just want to learn up my tables and repeat it, then a narrow lens will work fine. But if you're looking at true education, real education, where you want, want the students to listen to what you're saying and then be able to correlate it with all the other things that they have learned and their experiences and what's going on in their environment, and actually have that holistic understanding, positive emotions is what is going to help. So priming your students or trying to get your students into a positive state of mind is also important for their learning and understanding to be more holistic. And the last bit, I think some of you might be quite familiar with this, but I still want to point it out, is that there's also a chemical, it's a neurotransmitter called dopamine, which is released in our brain when we feel happy. It plays many roles. One of the functions of dopamine is actually turning on the learning centers in your brain, which again means more receptive to hear, to listen, to understand. So I think, yeah, I'll stop with, these three pieces of information. And I would suggest the next 30 minutes, we can make it more practical. And what I would like to talk about is what are the practical action steps, because I've talked about so far the importance of emotions in the learning journey of the student. And now, if you have questions about what you can do in practical terms as a teacher to increase this or influence this, there are things that you want to do. But rather than me sort of just list it down, I want to hear from you, your questions, even your experiences. We can make this interactive and specific questions you have, and then we can bring in these points in addressing those, so that we make it very relevant to your contexts. So, Varun, do we have any questions now?
Yes, yes. So those were some amazing insights that you actually mentioned, and a couple of questions that have come up from our educator community. So you have specifically spoken about dopamine rush, and nowadays it is often observed that due to social media, due to thousands of content that is available online, the significance of consistently working for dopamine or the rush is easily available. And you also mentioned points regarding persistence, right, ma'am? Due to easy access to all of these things, students are this a trend is actually being observed where students are not really putting in a lot of effort, and the persistence angle is sort of missing in the entire digital ecosystem. So what do you suggest on that? How can teachers work on enabling students to work hard, and at the same time there's a result oriented system to the entire cycle? So instead of having easy access to dopamine, and that is also making us humans lazy in the longer run, right? We are directly seen social media's influence on everybody as of now, and it is right to be seen. So what do you suggest on these lines?
Wow, this is a wonderful question and also a very tricky one. And let me say upfront, I don't have any answer, but I do have some suggestions and some thoughts on, how we can do this. So first of all, I really want to acknowledge that the observation that, we get very quick and easy dopamine rushes from social media, from the pings on our Facebook and the likes, and these can very easily substitute what otherwise we would have worked hard and persistently towards getting, right? So here's what I will say is that, see, there is an upside and a downside to this. So given digital learning, I think at least with students, we can't, there is an upside and there is a downside, right? So we don't want to sort of totally take it away, but I think at least if I were a teacher or educator, what I would do is try my best when I have the child's attention, when I'm interacting with the child, because I don't have the child's attention all the time, right? When I'm interacting with the child, and this is, it's not a very easy job for teachers now, because by the way, the child is also having their compartment buckets where there is this internet and digital and the cartoons and the video games which are giving the quick dopamine, and then there's this teacher who might relatively be more boring or dry, right? So for the teacher, I'm not saying you have to compete against that, but at least you have to know that it's not a competition, but this is your rival, right? This is your rival for the child's attention, which means you might have to go that much out of the way to really make it engaging and interesting for the child. And to understand that from the child's perspective, that attention and engagement may not come easily, but yet you have something that the child cannot get from the digital space, which is the human aspect, right? Which is the human aspect. So to leverage what you have to make it an engaging and enjoyable experience for the child, in fact, even more, because and at the time that you have the child, maybe you can also engage with children on what they're also picking up from those other places, right? So bring in those things into the conversation, and then also make sure that you get your agenda into it. So try to make use of that opportunity. And it's not really going to help to just say that, oh my God, this is happening, but it's happening, but what can you do about it? So that is one clear thing that I want to say. The other thing I want to remind teachers about is, okay, so there's something called mirror neurons. Okay, so one of the things that can happen to the children also is that, because there's something called attention deficit trait. So this is not ADD, it's not attention deficit disorder, but it's attention deficit trait. Now, attention deficit trait is something that is situation induced, and this can happen to anyone, children, adults. It's not a problem, right? It's not a trait. So it's not some people who have ADT. I'm not saying ADD, but ADT, the second one, trait, right? It's anyone can succumb to it. And how do we succumb to it? So this happens, for this, I just want to tell you. So there's a part of our brain called the frontal lobes, which is here, right? So these frontal lobes are responsible for a lot of the cerebral work that we do. So this is what human beings have, in addition to, the primitive brain, like the reptilians have and all of that. Then you have mammalian brains. And then this is the most evolved part of the brain. And this is the part of the brain that we will use for our learning and maths and education and decision making and prioritization. Now, this part of the brain is a very, very clever, intelligent machine, but it's not a parallel processor, it's a serial processor. And because it's a serial processor, when we think we are multitasking, what this part of the brain is actually doing is time slicing, which means I might think that I'm doing 2-3 things together. So for example, I might think that I'm listening to my teacher on a Zoom call. And so nowadays kids have Zoom education, right? And I've switched off, but I'm doing something else. I have another window open, and I'm doing something else. So I might be doing multiple things at the same time. But what my brain is doing is it's doing a little of this, little of this, little of this, little of this, and then coming back to this. So basically the brain is getting overloaded, this part of the brain, because there's a switching time and effort involved in that. And then when this part of the brain, because of that overload, it gives up, it snaps. Basically that snap is picked up as a panic signal by the primitive part of the brain, which is the one that typically picks up any kind of panic signal that comes from outside and gets into the stress response, right? But here this part of the brain, the reptilian brain, is picking up the panic signal from this part of the brain, and the reptilian brain comes into control, which is not a very clever part of the brain. And then you are not able to do it even better, right? So now that is because of, and when we go digital, we often are, there's more of multitasking. We are tempted to multitask. And so if you notice this happening to your students, and this is happening to a lot of students and executives worldwide, again, as a teacher, if you can recognize this frenzy, this irritation, this distractiveness, and you looking that, your students are not present, what you really have to do, the solution to that is to somehow get them away from the multitasking and focus on just one thing. And you can use many ways to do that. You can educate them about it. You can, if you want, you can do a little meditation in class. You can ask them to close their eyes, focus on their breath. Whatever it is, the solution is simple, but you need to recognize that this is happening and try to get that undivided attention of your students. And the other thing I want to talk about in terms of just being able to get that undivided attention of your students is something that is going to help you and them. It'll help you in doing your job, of course. It's going to help them in focus and not get into ADT. It's going to help in a third way, if you choose to, which is you can use that connection of undivided attention to actually change their emotion by managing your own emotion. So one of the things, it's not so easy if someone is, feeling down or feeling sad. Of course, there are ways you can have a conversation. There are ways that you can make the person feel happy. But suppose you're teaching a class of 50 students and you don't have the time and bandwidth to go and have one-on-one conversations to, cheer up each person. There is still something that you can do as a teacher to actually make all of them happier. And for this, the secret tool that you will use is something called mirror neurons. So I'll quickly tell you about what mirror neurons are. Mirror neurons are a set of, neurons in our brains whose job it is to actually mirror or copy, or create copy images, basically copy images of the emotional states and the patterns in other people's brains. So, the easiest way to understand how mirror neurons works is I can tell you about how they were discovered. So they were discovered around 15, 20 years back in a lab in Italy, where neuroscientists were doing an experiment on a monkey, and they were looking at which part of the monkey's brains are actually related to hand and leg movement, and they were mapping it on a computer screen. And they took a break and they left the wiring on, and they noticed that the screen is showing that the part of the monkey's brain associated with hand and leg movement is being activated, even though the monkey is not actually moving its hands and legs. So they said, what's happening here, right? Let's figure out. And they checked all the connections. And then they realized the monkey is actually staring outside at the window at somebody who's eating an ice cream and moving his hands. And so the monkey's brain is showing activation in the region related to hand and leg movement. So of course it didn't, stop here. Then there were a series of experiments, not just on monkeys, but on human beings. So typically experiments will be like, suppose they call Varun and me into the lab, and they show Varun a horror movie, something, and they, and he's wearing headphones, and they wire his brain to see if his brain is showing fear. And they ask me, I don't see the movie, I can't hear anything, but I'm just asked to observe Varun's face as he sees the movie. And then they scan my brain, and my brain shows those patterns of fear also. That's mirror neurons. So if you're watching a movie and the heroine is crying and you see the tears, that's mirror neurons. You're in a rock concert, everyone is happy and you're happy and you don't know why, that's mirror neurons. Sometimes in riots, you see people are angry and they don't know who's angry, why. But because everyone's angry, that person is angry, right? That's mirror neurons. You're in a cricket stadium, right? The players are playing, but you're feeling all that adrenaline rush. That's mirror neurons. Now, the thing is, mirror neurons work only when you're giving the other party your attention. So for example, I'm not interested so much in sports at all. Okay, so there could be a really interesting match playing on the television screen. People in my house are watching it, and I could be walking in and out of the drawing room or even sitting there. Nothing. Their mirror neurons are activated, but mine is not, because I'm not interested. I'm not giving attention. So now, as a teacher, let's see. So mirror neurons, of course, makes us vulnerable to actually take on emotions from other people, but it also gives us the opportunity to be the influencers. Now, as a teacher, when you walk into the classroom, you have a golden opportunity, because if you can get the undivided attention of all your students and you can manage your emotions so that you're feeling happy and cheerful, you can rest assured that, you are influencing them, right? Eventually what they feel will be a combination of, other influences as well as your influence, but don't give up this chance that you have to influence students. So that is also something that I wanted to bring in terms of really managing that attention that the students give. So, okay, many answers that I brought in with that question, but yeah, we can go to the next.
Wow, that's a very interesting concept, and I'm pretty sure it was very relevant. But I just have a counter question here. How much influence does mirror neurons have on herd behavior, or in general, when you look at a lot of people, having the same set of thoughts or mindsets? How much influence does mirror neurons have on them?
A lot, actually. So that's why we have all this conformity and herd mentality. So the easiest way to understand this is remember resonance in physics we
Right.
learned with pendulums. So if you bring two pendulums next to each other and they are vibrating at different, oscillating at different frequencies, eventually they'll start tuning to the same, right?
Same.
So that's called entrainment. And that's similarly, so there are two people, that's how the mirror neurons is happening. They're influencing one another. But if there are many pendulums in a room, again, you'll see that eventually they all, and oscillate at the same thing. And that's called resonance. And it can really get amplified because they actually support and feed off one another. And that's what happens in bigger groups and herds. So yeah, if your whole class is feeling boisterous, you have work to do then.
Indeed. That's very interesting. There's a question from Nisha Shrestha. She is asking, sometimes when we try to practice positive mindset with kids, we do not get positive response from the parents. And how can we tackle such situations where parents are involved and positive mindset needs to be reinforced into the child's behavior?
Okay, so is it possible to ask Nisha for more clarification?
Sure.
Yeah, so as in, so just give me the situation a little more, because the parent, like, is the parent actually there with you in the classroom, or how is this happening? The parent involvement.
All right. So, Nisha ma'am, can you please go ahead and type given more information. Meanwhile, we can take another question. There's a question from Miss Kavita Srinivasan. It reads out: can you share some significant dopamine factors available in an educational setup or a campus to address learning needs of varying levels? I believe a good student support services may be one. Thank you.
A good student support services. I would need more clarity on that. Like, does that mean that you are, is it a good student support services or a good student support services? I hope it's the former, in which case, yes, right?
Yes,
Which means you're talking about a group which is there, which has been set up to support students. And I totally get that. I think it's good to have that. But I really want to sort of take this moment to tell every teacher that each one of you as a teacher should also wear that parallel hat of a student support services. So, as in, I'll give you an analogy here from the corporate world, okay, where you have the manager and the boss and an employee, and then you have the HR, right? So many times what happens in corporate organizations, and I've seen this happen also. In fact, something very funny happened to me once, and I'll just share that. So this was many, many years ago in my second job. I was very young, early 20s. I was in Citibank, and basically there was something that happened. There was an argument and all of that. Disagreement in the team and something, and basically I started crying, and my boss panicked so much because I was crying, and instead of really managing that situation, what he did was he was like, oh, okay, he called the HR lady and said, manage her, right? So it was like my boss is going to manage my intellectual output, but when I'm crying because of, again, and I was crying because of something he had told me which was related to the work. It was the whole person. It was outsourced to the HR. And I was like, what does the HR lady know any context about this? We need to sort it out. So today I actually conduct a lot of workshops on emotional intelligence and EQ. And the one thing that I tell everyone is that every manager, you have to also manage the emotions along with the work, right? So you don't outsource it to the HR. So similarly, every teacher has to also play that support center to the extent possible. So don't just say that, okay, we have a counseling services, or, someone's, we just sort of outsource the emotional aspects of our students there. No, I think it is your business. If the student is in your class in front of you, it is also your business to, if not to make it your business, because it has a clear connection with the students' learning. And okay, let me show you how clear this connection is and why this managing the emotions of students is, I would believe it's one of the key tasks of the teacher itself. Think of a triangle. Okay, the triangle having three components. One component is learning, One is enjoyment and one is performance. And performance, I'm saying it's the exam performance, right? The test performance. That's also important because, you know, schools operate in an environment where you have exams, you have performance, and the performance is going to then lead to a certain kind of emotion also. They're all connected to one another. Now, very often the teachers think that, okay, their job is related with the learning and the performance, not the emotions. But if you look at the way the brain is wired, and if you look at it from the student's perspective, let's look at the interconnections. If the student is actually enjoying himself or herself, so if the enjoyment is high, which means the student's being happy. I just told you the research about how the student will actually learn better, the student will perform better, right? Now, if the student is learning better, the student is going to perform better. And when we learn something, do we feel happier? Yeah, that's inbuilt, right? Even a child, when you learn something, I learned this today. So it's hardwired. So learning impacts enjoyment also. So this connection also works. Now, when you do well, when you're performing well, again, you feel happier, right? So all of these are actually interconnected. So it is not a trade-off between learning, enjoyment, or performance. They're all adding to one another. And so you have to look at it as a holistic thing. And if you think your job is only about the learning and you leave out the performance and enjoyment, then it doesn't work like that, because for the student, they're all connected. And so if you can also see it in that connected fashion, you can do more justice to your role.
That's a very insightful, methodology of them preparing a class. And there's a question from Uzma Nabila. There are actually two questions. The first question reads out something like how to not carry your own turmoil of emotions to the class, and the second question is how to help your students with anxiety, and other issues.
Beautiful, thank you. There are many ways, and I'll give you just a few quick fixes here, right? Quick, simple tools that you can use. And if you want more, I do have a lot of content on my website, so you can go and you can read up more and learn. But I'll give you the simple things that are easily executable. So one of the easiest way to break the grip that our emotions have on us, especially negative emotions, or the turmoil that you're talking about, which is in the brain, is to do slow, deep breathing. And I'm giving this as a quick fix because this can be done anywhere. You can do it even if you can grab 2-3 minutes before entering the classroom, you can do that. And I'll also tell you why this works. First of all, you can try it out and you'll see that it always works. But I'll tell you why also, because when we get into an anxiety mode or the stressed mode, the fight or flight mode, there are lots of changes that happen in our body-mind system, right? The heartbeat goes up. These are all for protection, right? So the heartbeat goes up and there are changes in the brain. There are changes in our blood flow. Basically, the hormones released, digestive system slows down, a bunch of things. These are the changes in the stressed mode. One of them is also our breathing becomes fast. Now, if you look at all the other changes, they're all like involuntary. Like, it's like you can't suddenly say heartbeat slow down. You can't reverse any of them consciously, right? Like you can say hand go up, hand come down, but you can't say body release this hormone, okay? So there are voluntary activities and involuntary activities in the body. Breathing is almost like a switch activity that nature has provided to us, because even if you don't say breathe in, breathe out, it's automatic, which means it's one of the shifts that happens. But if you want, you can consciously breathe in and breathe out. So slow, deep breathing is associated by the body and brain with the relaxed state, not the stress state, not the anxiety state. So if you deliberately practice slow, deep breathing, you'll just see tuck, 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 tuck. It comes down quite quickly. So it's a very quick hack that you can use. And for your students also, you can teach them this. Another quick hack that we can use to shift emotions is there's something called a negativity bias in our brain. And this is really widely prevalent a lot today. So again, I'm not getting too much into the science of this, but this is really that our brain is wired to give more attention to problems and threats than the things that are going well, because of the safety and evolutionary response. So if you just take 2-3 minutes out and you start thinking of all the good things that are happening, things that you can feel grateful for, things that you can appreciate, consciously start doing that, again, you break that cycle and you take your brain onto a different path. So with your students also, if you can start your class with, you can do it formally or you can do it informally. Like formally, you can say, okay, everyone take out your notebook, write 5 things that you're grateful for. I start my classes in IIM Bangalore with this, right? And the students really benefit because you're shifting your attention into the things that are working for you in your life, because those things are also there. You're acknowledging that, and then that sets a platform for the rest of your learning and the rest of your experience there. Or as if they're smaller children, you can just ask them, tell me something nice that happened to you today, and sort of, just bring those things out so that you have again taken the brain into looking at things that it can feel good about. And then the emotion changes automatically with that. So yeah, these are 2 simple things that you can use. I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Yes. I'm so sorry. That was a very interesting insight that you shared, and I think that would be a great way for teachers to definitely use it. There's a question. There's a follow-up question from Mr. Pramod Kumar. It reads out something like, how can teachers start a class and make them happy immediately, make the students happy immediately, make them laugh, and how can you start the class in a very positive manner? What are the different techniques to do so?
Yeah, so there are lots of techniques, and I'm sure there will be enough of you who have your own. I mean, I know a lot of faculty, even in IIM, a lot of my colleagues. I'm not good at telling jokes, so I don't tell jokes, but I know lots of people who start the session with a joke. And I'm sure you must have seen, if you look at the TED Talks, for example, a lot of TED speakers, they'll start with a joke and they'll be telling, every 3-4 minutes, they'll be giving a funny incident. First, I used to think, why are they doing this? Like, why are they entertaining us? And then the more I started teaching, I realized that's part of the job. And that's part of the job because when they make us laugh, they actually open up our brain so that our brain can listen and understand. So if you are someone and telling jokes comes naturally to you, tell jokes, right? You can do that. I know people who, what else do they do? Like I said, I used to do gratitude logging. There are times, and it depends on the receptivity of the students. There are times when I have started the class with a small meditation also. In fact, there are times in IIM Bangalore when I haven't planned to start it with a meditation, but I walk into the class and, because it's placement time or they have lots of assignments, there's so much stress in the class, you can feel it. And I'm like, gosh, if this is how you all are feeling, I can't even teach you anything, right? Because teaching is not that I go and I say whatever I know and then I walk out. No, the receivers have to take it in. So I'm like, there are no receivers here. And then I actually take 5 minutes out, sometimes 10 minutes out, and we do a meditation, a guided meditation. So, if you can't lead the students through a meditation, there are lots of beautiful small guided meditations available even on YouTube nowadays. Play it for them, right? And meditation is not anything religious. You can just have a guided visualization, anything. And there are tools. Invest 5 minutes in that, and then the next 90 minutes of your class, you have just changed the effectiveness of that. The analogy that I like to use with meditation, at least, is really that of, it's not my own, I've heard it in some Zen story, but it's like there was a woodcutter, who's chopping trees. It's not a nice analogy, but he's chopping wood, and the sword is very blunt, and so it's taking a lot of time. And then somebody comes and says, why don't you sharpen the sword a little? He says, no, I'm so busy. I'm behind schedule. I can't waste time to sharpen the sword. And he goes on, right? But the truth is, if you take those 2 minutes to sharpen the sword and you come back, you'll actually be able to be way more effective. So that is how, so if you can, sometimes you say, I won't tell jokes in my class, or I won't, do a meditation, or I won't do something like that because it's not directly related to the content that I'm teaching. We're already behind syllabus. We have to cover all this content. But that's not true. If you take that time out, even though it might seem like you're wasting time to tell a joke, or you're wasting time to do a little meditation or something, some chitter chatter to get people into a nice, joyful, bright mood, you'll see the benefits of that in better efficiency and learning in the rest of the time in your class.
That's great. There's a question from an account by the name The Learner. Happy teachers and in general happy people aren't taken seriously, especially by parents. Realistically speaking, strictness is equated with efficiency and capability. What are your thoughts on these, ma'am, and how can we counter it?
That's so true. That's beautiful. That's nice. In fact, that's a challenge I have also faced. Now, that is something like it's like one of these myths in society, right? So it's not true. Like for me, like I know that when I'm happy, I'm actually more efficient, more effective, more productive. But I also know that I can be perceived as not so, I don't know, whatever. Like the serious version is more. So the question, at least that I keep asking myself is, am I going to go by the myth or am I going to go by my truth? And every time I've chosen, the more I've chosen the truth, what I've seen is that in the short run, I run the risk of being perceived as flaky or, oh, not serious or not so intelligent, all of that in the short run. But when the effects actually start coming in the long run, people always turn around and they see the benefits, right? They get it. So I would not sacrifice the effectiveness at the cost of that perception. One, two, uh, see, at one level, we can never ever control what another person is going to think about us, right? So that's always going to be their judgments and their points of views. So if you are someone, if you are convinced, so and you will have to try it out as experiments. If you are convinced that your results, your efficiency, by the way, everything that I said about happiness and performance, I said it from the point of view of the student, but it's true for you also. You will be a better teacher. You will be more energetic. You will be able to persist even with the difficult students if you are happy, right? So when you are happy and you can persist better and your performance, even as a student, goes up and your students' performances goes up and you have the evidence to back it, then you're not going to care so much about whether another parent or anyone else, what they think about you. You're just going to be able to do your job and say, I want the best results. And believe me, people turn around. They will change their views about you. They might initially have a view just based on this, but they will revise it and they will update it. And over time, they'll even come to you and say, how is it that you're so happy and you achieve so much and you get the results? Then you can start telling them about the science of happiness and say, you know what, it's a myth that in order to produce great results, I have to have a stern, stressed, or anxious expression. And then that is their time for them to learn as well. So that is what I would go with. Yeah.
Very interesting, ma'am. There's a question from Rashi Dua. It reads out, at times, unhappiness is caused due to hormonal imbalances, particularly in adolescents, where they become rebellious or irritable, and etc. They show withdrawal symptoms, etc. What self-help techniques can be taught to them? How can, what self-help techniques can be taught to them? That is the question.
So beautiful. So indeed. So remember I told you about the stress response, right? So that's also hormones are released actually. So if you look at what is happening in the zone of emotions, there's thoughts and of course emotions, which are the effect, and there are hormones, the chemicals, right? They are all connected. So it's like a chicken and egg. It's like all these parts of a complex system, right? So if you have certain kinds of thought patterns can make you feel a certain way. When you feel a certain way, your body will release certain hormones. Because of the presence of those hormones, the anatomy or which part of your brain is active is actually changed. For example, when the stress hormones are present, the reptilian brain is under control. When the reptilian brain is under control, the kind of sense making that the reptilian brain does, the thinking patterns are different from the kind of sense making that the other part of the brain does. That's why the broaden and build theory works, right? So again, that will influence the kind of thoughts, and then that will influence the kind of emotions. So I just want you to get that it's a complex system, right? Where each one of these are influencing the others. Now, there's a good thing and a bad thing whenever you have a complex system like this. The bad side of it is that, of course, it's very complex. And the chaos, if you're in a negative spiral, there are negative thoughts, negative emotions, the hormones associated with that, and you can be in a spiral. The good thing is that you can create a shift by changing any of them. So you can create the shift by correcting the hormones or changing the hormones. And of course, there are medicated doctors who do things like that. You can create the shift by actually working on the, actually, by the way, even the body is involved. Okay, let me add this other thing. Just like in the stress response, I told you the breathing, the anatomy. So if you, for example, if you do yoga and meditation, what happens is you're changing your physiology, you're doing the slow deep breathing. Through that, you're actually changing the hormonal levels. Okay, you're actually deciding which hormone is being secreted more, which one is being suppressed, right? And you can influence that. And through that slow deep breathing, you can change your thoughts also. You reach a state of stillness. So similarly, now if you go to a therapist, and I told you about yoga and meditation here, or exercise, kids, exercise is great. When you play, by the way, lovely hormones, the good hormones are released in your body when you play. So get your kids to go and do, or teenagers is what you were talking about, get them to go and play and exercise. Or if you go into therapy or counseling, or do, what I told you about yourself, the gratitude logging, you're thinking of the things. So you're playing at the level of the thoughts, reframing your thoughts, that will influence emotions, and that will influence hormones. So you can intervene at any level. So please don't ever think that this is due to hormonal imbalance and therefore it has to be only corrected with hormonal doses. No, it's a complex system. Even the hormonal imbalance, all of these can be think of, like in science, we have dependent variables and the cause and the effect, right? All of them are the cause and effect together, right? So it's great if you can see that there is a hormonal imbalance, as much as that is a cause for feeling sad. I'm not denying that much. It is also an indicator that you could change of a certain kind of thinking pattern or certain kinds of thinking habits or feelings. So you can make the intervention wherever you want. I hope that helps.
That's yes, definitely. There's a question from Ms. Sushma Reddy. It reads out something like, there are sometimes difficult students in the class who disturb the class, even when especially during the online sessions. How would you handle difficult students, and what are the different techniques in which you can handle them?
Okay, so okay, so there is no carpet answer that's going to work for everyone here. It depends on the age, the stage, how many other students are there, how much is your pressure in terms of fulfilling syllabus and all. I'll just speak from my experience, because I have difficult students even in an MBA classroom, right? And or even in an exec program, even in executive program, sometimes you have disruptive participants who have some other agenda than everyone else. So for me, I always maintain my loyalty to the majority. So I would not want everyone else to pay a price because of those students. Yet at the same time, so it's a trade-off between that and also engaging with that one particular student to make out what is it, right? If a person is being disruptive, or a person is being aggressive, or just not listening, sometimes you can, if you give that person your undivided attention, engage with them one-on-one, and if it's a child especially, with a loving way, listening, trying to empathize and understand. And again, I'm not saying it will always work, but you can make progress towards getting that person to ease out a bit. But every time you do that, you're also sort of doing it at the cost of all the other students. So that is the trade-off that you as a teacher have a call to make. If you have an opportunity to connect one-on-one with those disruptive students outside of class, then you can make use of that. If you don't have that opportunity during the class time, it's like when you're driving a car, you have to decide, right, how much attention to give which thing. You have to make those intuitive calls.
Right. Wow, that's very interesting and very insightful. So there's a question from Mrs. Padma Priya Vayuvegula. It reads out something like, sometimes children say that I need a break, I don't want to study, and in case if the situation requires them to study, how can you motivate them?
Okay, you may not agree with me, but I say my point of view here. I think if the child is saying, I need a break, give them a break, even if it's very short. Unless, and again, you are the wisest, unless you see that someone is really using this to manipulate you again and again. But if it's a genuine ask for a break, our brains need break. Like I told you, it can be a great refresher. A break doesn't have to be a long break. Here's what I would do. If a child is saying, give me a break, it's too much, I would say, take a break. But I will say, I'll tell you what to do in the break. And I'll teach that child slow, deep breathing. And I'll say, sit down and do that, right? Or I'll give the child some crayons and say, okay, do some doodling. Something that I know that is going to help the child's brain. By the way, taking crayons and doing some artwork or doodling is a great therapy for the brain to put in between your other kinds of learning and memory activities. So I would give the break, but also be smart enough to use that. But if it's a child who's genuinely asking for a break, wants to drink water, go to the toilet and all, I would give it also.
Indeed. Wow. We'll just take two more questions, Professor.
Sure.
I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So there's one question from Ms. Deepa Kaur. It reads out something like, how can you control the emotions of anger in children, or how can you teach them to control anger?
Wow. Okay. So, and Deepa, a child of what age are you looking at? Because really, I mean, the answer to this will sort of depend on that.
Assuming all of these teachers are majorly from the K-12 background, so middle school.
But still.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Class 5 to 7.
Yeah. So again, see, with anger, whether they're children or adults, suppression. Okay, with negative emotions, let me say, there are three ways of dealing with negative emotions. Okay, so one is suppression. You hold it inside you, you don't show, you show it out. Second is expression. Third is reappraisal, where you're processing it and you look at it in different ways. You use reframing tools so that you don't actually feel that anger in different ways. Simple example of reappraisal: somebody has said something to you and you feel angry because of that. You put yourself in that person's shoes and you try to see why might they have said it, right? So you get a little empathy. Your brain starts looking at it in a different way, and then you might start feeling differently. So that's a simple way of reappraisal. Now, between suppression, expression, and reappraisal is always recommended. It's a good thing, but it takes some time and effort and engagement, either by yourself or the teacher can help you do that. So it's a bit like therapy, but it's on a very minute, smaller cases that, what else can you think of? Or do you think that's really so important? Or, sort of you help the person think of it in different ways so that the anger dissolves a little and becomes less. Or you ask the person to think of what other nice things are also happening in your life, or who has hurt you, or what might that person be going through, right? So you can basically make the child feel differently. Now, the cost with reappraisal is that it's going to take some time and engagement from your side. Let's look at suppression and expression. The cost with suppression is a lot, which is our body. When we suppress emotions, especially emotions like anger, our body pays the price. What the worst thing is with suppression, it builds up, and it can explode at some other time. So suppression is usually not recommended for anyone. Of course, there are some certain jobs like air hostesses, receptionists and all, who as a part of their job, they have to sometimes suppress their emotions, and that there's a term for that. It's called emotional labor, because it's so laborious, and they really need to seek out therapy or some other way of venting it out, and they are actually paid more for it. So I would not, so asking a child to suppress their emotions, especially anger, I would not recommend it at all. Now, let's look at expression. Expression has its pros and cons. If there are other people involved, it can hurt the other person. But the benefit of expression is that it's come out and the communication has been made. So again, that's why now, depending on the age, if to the extent you can use reappraisal, I would use reappraisal. With a small child, I would also allow the child to just express, and it's okay to express, let it come out, and so that the child can move on. I would never go in for suppression with, actually, as far as possible, adults also, definitely with children. So I hope that helps.
Yes, indeed. One last question from Atia Fatima. There are some gifted students who often get too excited expressing themselves, which may distract other students in the class. How can we control gifted students? And I mean, this is also a very relevant question, I feel, because the reason why we even started Teacher was that I felt that, in general, teachers aren't getting the support that is required, where all this information can be shared. And in our education current system does not help gifted students in the traditional sense. They often end up dropping out and doing some great things if things go their way. If that doesn't, I mean, they end up being labeled as whatever names that they can be called. Uh, so this is a genuine problem, and always the education system gets blamed for it, that it is not made for unique students. So this is a very a relevant question that majority of the teachers in our community also often face. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so okay, very good question. It's also a very personal question. So I'll tell you why. Because I mean, as a student, I used to face this. I mean, I was like the Hermione. I used to get very excited in class, and I could see that for some teachers it was a disruption, and and then and it would be, it's not fun for the student then, right? And I was eventually sort of just tune out. I would tune out of those classes. But there were other teachers who supported me in different ways. So I'll just give an example. I had this maths teacher called Mr. Natarajan in 11th, and he was so nice. So he realized that I used to be quite sort of, I was not interested in his class. It's like I was like, okay. And so he realized, so he used to give the whole class a set of maths problems, and then he would say, Ramya, come here, and beside his desk he would give me different kinds of maths puzzles to solve, because the level of problems that he was giving was not challenging enough for me. And he would give me, so, and actually it worked for me, it worked for the rest of the class, and it just became the norm. So and there was another teacher, for example, we had this one computer science. She was like, Ramya, come here. So these were students, teachers who would actually, they realized that they wanted to, that that you could give a different set of challenges or a different kind of work to the students and keep them engaged, so that they are not disrupting the others. But does this take extra time and effort on the part of the teacher? Yes. But if you can do it, I think that's the best that you can do in a class. And I agree with Varun that the education system is not designed to support gifted students. So very often, they can either just get disengaged or drop out or say there's nothing here for me and all of that. So as a teacher, if you can recognize that, and at the same time, like I said, remember that your duty is towards the whole class, but your duty is also towards these gifted students. So give them a different kind of activity, a different kind of challenge. They are happy, the others are happy. And try to do it in a very sort of natural way, so that the class doesn't feel separated. At least the way, like for example, the way this teacher did it, I don't think there was any ill feeling towards anybody that I'm getting to do puzzles when they're doing the other kind of, I think he sort of just made it like yeah, very natural. And that way children are also quite, if you are not feeling that you're discriminating or doing different things, the children don't usually feel that way also. So as long, I think what's key here is your intention. If your intention is pure, that you genuinely want to help all the students are not going to start saying you're discriminating, you're being partial, all of that, because they'll see that you are trying to help them, you are trying to help the other person also. So yeah.
Indeed. That was a wonderful session, Ramya ma'am. Thank you so much for an amazing session. We are extremely thankful for you for accepting our request to be a part of this conclave and sharing your thoughts and information. It was one of the most insightful sessions, I believe, that because you have dissected the entire, concept of happiness, and you have included topics like persistence, dopamine rush, mirror neurons, herd behavior, and how can teachers create happiness in the classrooms. So it was a fantastic session, and educators from 5 different countries attended our live at this session, and we are really thankful for your efforts. And dear teachers, Dr. Ramya is also an entrepreneur. She runs a platform known as craftingourlives.com. I would be sharing the link in the chat window. You can go ahead, check out all the beautiful articles and content, and reach out to Dr. Ramya in case if it's required. So, any closing thoughts, Dr. Ramya?
Yeah, so what we've done is really scratch the tip of the surface and iceberg, especially when it comes to, creating happiness, which is something that we can actually synthesize. So if anyone, so there were questions, right? And I gave you some quick fixes and tips, but there's much more that we can do. So happiness can actually be a choice. We can create it more and more for others and for ourselves, and this is literally the line of work that I am in. So I would be delighted to go deeper into this with anyone, so feel free to reach out to me. I also have a lot of free content on my website craftingourlives.com. So I have free online courses on managing the inner world, on managing stress. So if you're interested in any of these topics, you can go deeper into it. And I just want you to remember that many times when it comes to happiness, there is almost a myth. We think that it is the result. Something happens and happiness or a state of mind is the result, the emotion. But science actually shows the other way. So, for example, if I know everything about your life, I can predict only 10% of your happiness. The other 90% of your happiness depends not on what is happening to you, everything that's happening in your world, how people are treating you, the marks you're getting, how much you're learning, everything. It depends on how your brain is processing the information and the things that are happening to you. And this 90% we get to work with. But instead of that, most of us are busy trying to control the other 10% or blame and saying, I'm feeling happy or not happy because this happened. Of course, those things happen. But if we start working on that other 90% instead, think how much more choice we can exercise on our own happiness levels. And so that is the world that I am inviting you into. So that is the world of managing our inner worlds. And through that, we can manage our emotions as well. So yeah, if you would like to know more of this, then please do get in touch with me. So maybe Varun, you can share my email ID as well, and people are welcome to reach out to me to know more. I also offer coaching programs, both individual as group, as well as group coaching on these systems and tools and hacks that we can use to reframe our brains in order to be more happy. So if any of this interests you, again, you can drop me an email and I'll tell you more about it.
Yes, absolutely, Professor. And just to add a couple of more pointers, there are some amazing, beautiful videos by Dr. Ramya on YouTube. You should check out her TED Talks. I was blown away with the beautiful content that was presented. So I would also be sharing that content, the links here. Along with that, I'll also share Dr. Ramya's email address. Please reach out to her. Follow her on Twitter as well. I'm just sharing the Twitter link. Yeah, so
I
great.
don't use Twitter too much. LinkedIn would work better.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
I have a Twitter ID, but I'm not using it. So LinkedIn is a good place to follow me. So all my writings and posts are on LinkedIn or Facebook.
Great. So I'll just share your
Share the
LinkedIn
LinkedIn ID.
link.
That's better.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Dr. Ramya. It was an incredible session. I personally am a real fan of psychology and cognitive behavior. And you have beautifully crafted both of them and explained the concept of happiness to all the educator community. I am on behalf of the team of teachers. I thank you for spending your valuable amount of time and sharing your insights with the educator community. I'm sure all the pointers that you mentioned, teachers will be taking it home and they'll be applying. I'm just looking forward about all the incredible impact that will be created, and it's all because of today's session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My honor. Wish you all the very best.